Hello, I'm Frank Cippola. Welcome to Fresh Outlook, a weekly look at the issues affecting our world. Today we start with the continuing unrest in Syria. The U.S. now getting more involved with word President Obama will assist the rebels trying to overthrow the government there. The White House sending small weapons to the rebels, but will it work, and what happens if it does? Can an unstable Syria make matters worse in the Middle East? Then it's back to the U.S., where the stock market took a hit this week after the Federal Reserve, which sets monetary policy, indicated it might be ready to wean us off its bond buying program, which many believe has helped push along the economic recovery. Is Wall Street ready to take the training wheels off? And later, we look back on the life of actor James Gandolfini. He was in many movies and plays, but will best be remembered as Tony Soprano, the head of the fictional New Jersey mob family in the show The Sopranos. Topic one, the violence continues. The U.S. now sticking more than just a toe into the conflict in Syria. The president's move, is it a sound one to send weapons to Syria, or will it make matters worse?
President Barack Obama has authorized sending weapons to Syrian rebels for the first time. The U.S. has conclusive evidence that the Assad regime used chemical weapons.
Our intelligence community assesses that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons, including the nerve agent sarin, on a small scale against the opposition multiple times in the last year.
Over 100 Syrians have succumbed to sarin attacks so far. John McCain has spoken out specifying the kinds of military aid necessary in the conflict zone.
It's a shameful chapter in American history, our refusal to help them. We have to have a no-fly zone. We have to give them the arms that they need, which is anti-tank and anti-air.
The Syrian opposition has welcomed the move, saying it will add real meat to their military might.
We feel sad that it took at least 93,000, according to the UN, martyrs to have fallen in Syria before that decision is made in the United States. I think having those weapons will truly change the balance of power. It allows us to have the right conditions for the transfer of power negotiations that will take place in Geneva.
The U.S. could provide the rebels with small arms, ammunition, assault rifles, and a variety of anti-tank weaponry, such as shoulder-fired remote-propelled grenades and other missiles.
Now, joining us to discuss this is a good panel here. Republican strategist Dee Dee Benkie joins us. Professor of Political Science Dalia Fahmy at the Long Island University. And the nation's preeminent political psychologist Dr.Bart Rossi joins us as well. And welcome all of you to this panel. First of all, how important is Syria to the United States overall Middle Eastern policy? Is important?
Syria is increasingly becoming important because it's not just about Syria. It's really about U.S.-Russian relations as well, U.S.-China relations, Iran, and increasingly and Lebanon. And so it's not just Syria. Syria is a small country, population, the state of New York State, 20 million people. But we need to really realize the geopolitical importance of Syria vis-a-vis U.S. relations with 7 major other states.
Dee Dee Benkie, Republican strategist, is the president's move to send weapons to the rebels a good one?
I think so. I mean,
Why?
For me to agree with President Obama, you know that that doesn't happen very often, but I absolutely support the president in this decision because we've got to have balance in the Middle East. And John Kerry, we've got our friends in Turkey, Great Britain, France. I mean, the good guys are sticking together on this because there are atrocities. Assad's a monster, so we have to try to have some balance. And it's not ideal, but it's better than doing nothing.
Well, let's talk about whether or not it's enough. Is it? Dr. Rossi.
Well, first off, I think that the president is in a real conflict here. Psychologists talk about approach conflicts. This is really an approach avoidance conflict because he doesn't really want to do this, but he's doing it because he feels we have to do something. So this is something presidents have to take on occasionally. They don't want to. But it's a real problem for him, and it's a problem for us. I kind of agree with Dee Dee here. But I still think it's a high-risk situation, but it's something we kind of have to do.
Well, why do you draw that red line then? Why do you say if he uses chemical weapons, we have to do something? Why do you draw that red line that almost forces you into the conflict?
He shouldn't have done that. I mean, it made him, because now he will look weak if he doesn't do something. Because now we do know they've used chemical weapons, so we've got to go in. He said we would, so he needs to keep his word.
Yeah, red lines are bad.
They usually is.
Yeah,
so you're agreeing here?
Yeah, for Israel, the same thing came up, you know, with Netanyahu, the red lines in the sand. bad idea. I don't think politicians are going to go back to the red line thing.
But they continue to do so. That's the situation.
Yeah,
they continue to draw these red lines, hoping that the other side won't do what it says it'll do, and then they're sort of forced into it. We have one war ongoing in Afghanistan, one that has been wound down for all intents and purposes in Iraq. Do we have the wherewithal? Do we have the money to do this? Is it wise to get involved in something that might not be an exit strategy to?
Well, if you look at the most recent polls, we've got Pew saying that 70% of Americans don't want any U.S. intervention in Syria, and Gallup with 43% of Americans saying that they don't want any intervention in Syria. So there isn't the political will amongst Americans. However, is Syria strategically important? Absolutely. But what do we have as our most recent memory? An outcome in Iraq that is still unclear.
Yes.
We saw the transition of NATO forces power to the local Afghan military this week. The same day we saw 4 explosions, attempts at assassinations, and so the American population is not really gung-ho about another intervention. And we saw what is happening today in Libya vis-a-vis our kind of remote intervention.
Well, if the polls say that we don't support this, you're a political science professor. The president obviously is a politician. He's read the polls. Why do you do this?
Because we are part of an international global system. We don't move simply by political will. We look at our strategic interest and regional stability. Syria is really important because if Syria falls apart, who's going to take over that part of our sphere of influence? Right now, Russia is heavily invested in Syria. This is their last major Middle Eastern powerhouse. If we step out, this is obviously going to be further of Russia's sphere of influence. China has a great interest. Iran, we just had an election in Iran. We have yet to see what the current administration in Iran is going to do in Syria.
Well, I think that the other side of this, though, is nation building. And I don't think that the U.S. wants to get into nation building at all. So this is another conflict, and I agree with how important Syria is, but the real gist of this is that the United States is not wanting to build another democracy, another U.S. in another strategic outpost.
Let's get into the mind of President Obama. Traditionally, second terms for presidents are bad. They've been reelected by a significant margin, President Obama has. There's a bit of hubris on his part. Maybe I can do some things really to make a difference in the world. Then he has this red line. Now he has this conflict. He doesn't have the support of the American people. He's really in a bind, isn't he? What's he thinking now?
I think his mindset is that he has to do something. He has to buy time to see how the Syrian situation plays out. And he's being a politician, and he's trying to get by and see where the cards fall right now. I think that's what he's playing.
Dee Dee, are the rebels happy that the Americans are now becoming
Absolutely, because the rebels have been struggling, and they say that they don't have enough help, and they're not able to, and they've taken some steps back. So no, this is good for them, and I think it's good for Syria ultimately, and also for Israel. We have to remember, because we don't step up, if the countries don't step up, Israel is going to have to. So, and again, it's not just us. We're talking about friends in Turkey. We're talking about those on the borders, and it's very difficult. It's starting to seep into those countries. So, we can't take a blind eye. And as far as the polls go, I respect President Obama to make the right decision. This is the right decision. So what if it's not popular? You don't always put your finger up in the air and go by the polls, because a lot of times it's not the right answer. However, I will say, as a Republican, I think that with all the scandals here, maybe not a bad idea for him to go to another part of the world to distract. Although, if it still gets the job done, so be it.
Well, why isn't there a big enough coalition? Why aren't there Middle Eastern countries who are joining along with the United States and saying, this is good for no one?
Well, the coalition is getting bigger, though. I mean, throughout the world. Maybe in the United States it's a little tough, because we seem to be always the leader in doing these types of things, because we want to have goodwill in the world. And we have a good tradition of doing that. So here we are again. And I think it's a good thing.
I think that the psychology with some of these other countries is that if they do something, they may end up being a loser. And doing nothing doesn't put them out there at risk. So that's some of their thinking.
And Dalia?
I'm going to disagree. I think the leaders on this have been Britain and France. The United States is more currently stepping into the situation. We do have support in the Middle East with Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia as part of this coalition of the Friends of Syria, as it's called. They are the ones who came together to balance against China and Russia's constant opposition of intervention at the United Nations. The reason why this is increasingly becoming important is because as we put economic sanctions and arms sanctions on Syria, what Russia did was bolster the Syrian economy by flooding it with
Russia stepped up, so we have to step up. So, I mean, everyone's, it keeps escalating.
The difference here, and this is, to Obama's legacy, is can he really afford to have a increasingly, seemingly genocide on his record? We know that during President Clinton's administration, one of the blemishes is Rwanda.
And he does have a Nobel Peace Prize, let's remember that.
Aside from the Nobel Peace Prize, in all seriousness, President Clinton had to deal with the genocide in Rwanda that we said we didn't have a strategic interest in. If we continue to say this about Syria, in his own legacy, he's going to have to deal with...
Well, can we resolve this without our intervention? Can this be resolved?
So there's going to be the Geneva II Convention next month. And the strategy of this coalition of the Friends of Syria is if there's limited arms to the rebels, they can balance a little bit against the Syrian regime so that it forces the hand of Syria to come to Geneva with a negotiation table.
Everything I've seen, there's not much hope that this negotiation will work.
I have no hope in that.
You don't have,
no, because I don't think you negotiate with terrorists. I think this guy's a monster. So I think we have to give arms to the rebels, and the force has to be used. This guy's not negotiating. He's using chemical weapons. He's slaughtering people.
I think it's a stalemate. I think it's such a stalemate, and it's going to take years. And people are buying time. It's a conflict for everyone, not only the president, but everyone, including Russia and the leaders in Russia. This is not something that can be resolved easily, and I don't think it's going away.
Do you agree, Dalia?
I don't think it's simply arms are going to be the force. We have still not committed at all to a strategic military involvement. By giving arms to rebels doesn't mean we're doing much. This is actually
we're doing nothing now, so it's better than nothing.
Well, not really nothing. I mean, you're
not enough. I mean, to give them right now, the rebels really are struggling. They don't have what they need.
So we're going to perpetuate the same situation.
We've got to do something to try to stop and at least have a balance as much as we can. Otherwise, what do we do? Send boots in the ground? Great Britain, Turkey, United States, France, that we're going to do. So this is a first step. This is something.
I think that's the last thing that the president wants right now.
It is the last thing.
He's got an economy that's wounded and healing itself. The last thing we need is another engagement overseas.
Which is why we send them weapons. I mean, that's the alternative, is to give the rebels weapons so we can try to have some balance there.
So getting back to the poll, 70% of Americans say we don't want this involvement. Clearly, there's more concerns in the United States, jobs, the economy, and so on and so forth, as opposed to spending money in what might be another conflict with no way out.
Absolutely.
You say the president needs to not always put his finger in the air and see which way the wind is blowing, but make a decision as a president would based on geopolitical situations and so on. But what about not listening to the will of the people? 70% say no. Why not stay out of it and have it sort of work out itself?
Sometimes you have to step up.
And make
you have to make a difficult decision, and you have to stand by where you are, what the situation demands. And presidents are always in this type of conflict where people say one thing, but they've got to make a choice. And it's, as I said before, it's a real conflict, but they have to go forward.
And as Harry Truman said, the buck stops here, and ultimately the decision is with him, and probably Congress would go along. But is it a wise decision?
We also have to understand that President Obama inherited a new world, a world that is different, filled with different countries. We used to have a foreign policy strategy of our national interest was we support authoritarian leaders for the sake of stability. The Arab Spring showed us that no, we can no longer follow that program. President Obama's inaugural address said that we will stand with those who are on the right side of history in terms of democracy promotion. We've seen in the last 2 years many democratic elections in these countries. We're grappling with the road to a world full of democracies that are still unstable.
But Assad is clearly not on the right side, and there's genocide, and for a purely humanitarian effort, we've got to do something.
And this is why, as he was saying, we have to kind of stand against the political will of the people and actually get involved, not just for humanitarian reasons, but also for geopolitical reasons.
Secure the region or try to help keep it from escalating.
We have about 30 seconds from all three of you. Does the U.S. get involved further? Do you see at some point sending military troops there?
The U.S. will not get involved further because we have yet to have a clear strategy.
You say no.
The psychology of the day tells me no, no way.
Absolutely are. We're going to have to. This Assad's a monster, and we've got to go forward and do what we have to do with our allies, which is a big group of good countries, including Turkey, Great Britain, France. I mean, we're doing the right thing. We're on the right side.
All right, Dalia, Fahmy, thank you very much. Dr. Bart Rossi, the nation's preeminent political psychologist, and Dee Dee Benkie, Thank you so much for this lively panel. We're going to take a break now. Coming up next on Fresh Outlook, is the Fed ready to tap the brakes on the popular bond buying program? And if it does, what happens to the economic recovery? We'll be right back.